What is up, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of Deep Rooted Podcast. My name is Jade, and I am your host with the most. Now, before we get into anything on this channel, I need you to make sure that you're subscribed to the YouTube channel that you're watching this on, or the podcast listening app that you are listening in on, so that you never miss a beat with Deep Rooted. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about my testimony and how I got to where I am and what God is doing in my life currently. So when I was 15, I discovered that I was experiencing same-sex attraction, and it was really strong, really prominent, like stronger than when I was attracted to a male type of feeling. And I would pray about it and cry and ask the Lord to help me. And it just felt like the feeling was getting stronger and stronger each time I had prayed. And so essentially I gave into it. And so I got a girlfriend secretly, and my parents actually found out. And after we had broken up, I fell into a really dark and deep depression, as well as struggling with anxiety. And this went on for the next 3 years of my high school journey. So then I went to college. I go to California State University, East Bay. Shout out to my fellow pioneers. And I got into a relationship very early on, actually, with a transgender man, and he actually transitioned during our relationship. And we were together for about a year and a half, but my parents found out around 6 months that we were dating, and it did not go well at all. There was a lot of arguing and just a lot of really intense and emotionally traumatic conversations that we had. And so I ended up going back home that summer, and this is summer 2019, and it was horrible. Being at home was no bueno, and it was mentally and emotionally draining, to the point where I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't want to be there ever. I was trying to get shifts constantly at work so that I didn't have to be at home. And in July, it was my friend's birthday, and I planned to go up there for her birthday, just stay for about 4 or 5 days and hang out with her and also the person that I was with. And I received a phone call talking about things that was happening at home, and it made me really afraid, and I didn't want to go back. And so I didn't. And I had a conversation with my parents about going back home. Not coming back home, and didn't end too well. I stayed where I was, but essentially it wasn't a good conversation. And so thankfully my grandparents, my sister, and my aunt, and other family members were in support of me not being at home. But still, my parents, I sought their approval all of my life. And so when they don't approve of things, it's kind of like combating against, who I am, to a degree. So I ended up staying where I was until about August, which is when school started. And so when I went back to school, I had been struggling with smoking weed and becoming dependent on weed, as well as being codependent in my relationship. And so it was a really strong battle that I didn't even know that I was going through, because I was so high functioning. I was still living my life, going out, going to class, getting good grades. I was doing all of that stuff, but I was extremely depressed and anxious and resentful and just angry at the world, angry at my parents, just upset like all the time. And so when I went back to school, I essentially started smoking more than I had ever before. And it went from being on occasion to being about every day and almost every night. And I couldn't go without it. And so going into the new year in 2020, I was still smoking weed, still had that heavy addiction to the weed. But I started going to BCM, which was Black Campus Ministry at my school. Shout out to BCM. And I started attending every Tuesday and going to experience the Christ-like community that I had needed and that I had all my life at home. And in about February, I had a thought run through my head, which told me very distinctly, you're going to break up with him. And this was at night. I was in my ex's room, chilling on their bed, watching Broad City. And I had this thought run through my head, say, you're going to break up with him. And I was like, what the heck? No, I'm not. Like, that's not going to happen, just writing it off. And so this was before we went into quarantine. We went into quarantine around like the end of March. And so I was just like, no, that's not going to happen. And so this thought would come back every so often on occasion. And it went from you're going to break up with him to you're going to break up with him at the end of the semester. And I was like, what? Like, okay, well, the end of the semester is, a while away. The end of the semester is in May. We're in March now, we still have some time. Not realizing that we were going to go into quarantine at the end of March. And so around this time that I had these thoughts, I also was having dreams. And so in my dream, in the very first dream, my papa was with me. And so my papa passed away in 2018, and he had a stroke in 2008. And so in 2008, he was no longer able to walk and no longer able to speak properly. And so in my dream, he was with us, with my family and I, and we were kind of just living day-to-day life how we normally do. And so at the end of the night, we were dropping him off at this house, and there were all these people there, like hundreds of people at this house, chilling in the front yard. And so my mom was driving, and she got out of the car, and she helped my papa get out of the car and got his wheelchair. And so then these people came from the house and got his wheelchair and was rolling him up to the sidewalk and up the driveway. And so I turned around and I was watching them bring him up. And the whole time I was in this dream, I had not realized that my papa was there. Like, I had an idea and a sense, but it wasn't very clear. And so they rolled him up the driveway, and they stopped, and then he stood up and started walking. And at this moment, I became conscious, because I'm like, what the heck? Like, my papa hasn't walked by himself since since 2008. Like, I was 8 years old. And so I received a phone call, and it was a lady, and she said to me, hi, is this Jade? And I was just like, yes. And she was just like, hi, I'm here with your papa. Like, he wants to speak with you. And I woke up, and I was like, what the heck is going on? Like, I had never had a dream like that. Mind you, I wasn't dreaming in general since, oh my gosh, since like I was a junior in high school, maybe a sophomore, I hadn't had dreams. And I was like, what the heck? And I was asking my friends, I was asking old church family, what does this dream mean? And they were like, maybe he does want to talk to you, maybe he does want to see how you're doing or whatever. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so crazy. Then I still was having those same thoughts too. You're going to break up with him. And I was also trying to figure out what was happening with this dream. And so, like I said, in March, we went into quarantine, and I was just like, yes, no more school, but not realizing that I would have to go home in 2 weeks. And so I didn't realize that my semester was ending then. And so me and my ex would have conversations about if we were going to stay together and stuff. And I was just like, yeah, like we are, but deep down, I had this feeling like, what if we really are going to break up? Like, I don't want to break up. What if we are, Not knowing that God was telling me, like, you guys, like, this is going to happen regardless. And so right before I left school, I had another dream. And in this dream, it really was just carrying on like a regular dream until I was with my family. And so I was with my mom's side of the family, who is, um, um, my papa is her dad. And so I was with her side of the family, and all my aunts and my cousins and my grandmother. We were all there, and we were at Macy's. And I don't ask me why we were at Macy's, but we were at Macy's, and um, there was like four doors on the side. I believe like on the right hand side, like this, and they were like those push pull doors, but it was pitch black on the other side, and they were glass. And so I was walking with the store attendant, asking her questions or whatever, and all my family was like sitting down somewhere, and I heard these doors like pushing and pulling, like it was like somebody was grabbing all four doors and banging them back and forth, like trying to get my attention. And so I wasn't scared or anything, and so I walked over there, and I was just like, hello? And immediately I heard my papa start to speak to me. Now, let me remind you, I haven't heard my papa speak. I haven't heard his actual speaking voice since I was 8 years old. I didn't remember what he had sounded like, but I remembered in this dream. It was very distinct, and it was like I knew immediately. And so I asked him before he kept talking, I was like, wait, was that you in my last dream? And he said yes. And I was like, okay. So then he said to me, listen, you're the peculiar one in your family, but you're going to be okay. And I was like, okay. And then I just kept going on with the dream. So then when I woke up, I was like, peculiar. That's a weird word to use for somebody. That's a very strange word to use. I'm like, peculiar. And so I'm very intuitive. I question a lot of things, and I question the way people say things, their body language, why their face look like that. Why did they use that word? You know what I'm saying? So when he used that word, I was questioning. I'm like, what does that mean? So I asked my BCM family, and I asked my sister. I didn't really ask anybody else in my family because I just didn't know how they would react to my dreams or try to tell me they weren't real, whatever. And so I ended up looking up the definition of peculiar, just the regular dictionary definition, and it wasn't fulfilling. It was like, that doesn't make sense. Like, why would he say that to me? Like, he said it for a reason. And so right before I had come back home, I looked up the definition of peculiar, but I looked up what it meant in the Bible. And so I clicked on this one link and on Google, and it said, peculiar is used in the Bible for God's chosen people. And I was like, what? What did he say?
What did he say?
And I was like, that's impossible. Like, there's no way. And I mean, absolutely not. No way. And I kept this to myself. I didn't tell anybody because I was just like, no, there's no way. I told my ex, and he was like, well, maybe, I don't know. But I didn't tell anybody. So then I went home, and I kept thinking about this dream, and I didn't know what to do. So I just asked my grandmother, who I lived with, and I was like, look, Grammy, I had this dream. Papa, he said this to me. And I looked up the definition, and so I actually went back on Google and tried to look up the word again, and it was nowhere to be found. I kid you not. I could not find it anywhere. Went through pages and pages. I could not find the definition, and I was crying because I'm like, oh no, like they're gonna think I'm crazy. Like, I know I saw it, and not realizing that God had intentionally did that. Like, I was the only one to see this. That was for a reason. And so then my grandmother was like, well, maybe you should talk to your mom about it. And I was like, no, like, absolutely not, never in a million years, because I know how my mother gets, and she's very emotional. And, that was her that was her dad. So, like, I didn't want her to cry. I didn't want to cry, and I just didn't know what she would say. So I just avoided telling her. So then one day I was sitting in this room, and I was crying because I knew that what I heard was my papa speaking to me. And I really felt like nobody was going to believe me. So then I had a thought run through my head again, and it said, tell your mom. So I was like, put up a fight for a couple of days, but it was like every time I saw her, I just kept thinking about the dream. And so one day I was like, fine, I'll tell her. So I went and I told her, and she didn't even cry. She actually looked at me and smiled, and she was just like, that is true. She confirmed me. And she said that my papa actually used to have services with peculiar people, which essentially was people who could speak in tongues, who could interpret tongues, who was prophets and evangelists and apostles come and talk about their gifts and what they do and how God uses them. And immediately I was filled with the Holy Spirit, and I was crying because I felt this burden on my life come upon me, not realizing that I'm built for this, I'm made for this, and so it's not a burden. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Like, what do I do? And they were just like, well, you just have to do what God tells you to do. You just have to follow God, and He will, make your pathway clear. And so I was just like, okay. And so after that, I started following after God like it was nobody's business. I was reading my Bible constantly. I was watching sermons. I was doing everything. And I was washed clean of my same sex attraction and depression and anxiety. I experienced peace in my life for the first time ever. And I'm so blessed to know that God carried me through all that time to get where I am today, even more able bodied, even more Christ filled, even more excited about what God has called me to do. And starting this podcast was one of those things that the Lord has called me to do. He also called me to the church that I go to. Shout out to Anwa SBD, All Nations Worship Assembly in San Bernardino. He called me to go there. And my auntie Cynthia, she is my mentor, who is my spiritual mentor and also my, career wise mentor too. And he just led me here to such a beautiful place in my life. And I'm so thankful to know God, to experience God, and to build my life, my foundation with Christ. And it has been an amazing journey, and I'm so happy that I honestly got to do it being as young as I am, because now that I'm doing what it takes to build the foundation now, as I get older, even though my battles will look a lot different, my life will be more kingdom filled, will be more kingdom destined because of the work that I'm putting in now. And that doesn't mean that I don't still struggle with depression. That doesn't mean I don't struggle with same-sex attraction or anxiety, but I choose not to allow those things to overrule me and take over my life. And instead, I allow Christ to walk me through these things, to lead me in a direction where I'm not basing my life off of my sin or those battles that I struggle, but rather what He says about me and what I can do to overcome these battles. And my battles now in life are more of a spiritual thing, and they're very intense. And I notice that the more that I grow in Christ, the more intense that my battles become, but the more excited I am about what God is doing in my life. And I know that God has called me to be one who is vulnerable, as I am being right now, and one who has to suffer a little bit for the benefit of Christ. And He's just revealed so much to me about myself and what's in my heart, and I can't contain the amount of love that He has poured out upon me, the words that He has spoken over me through people. And that is really my testimony now. God is using me, like I said, for Deep Rooted Podcast, as well as using me at my church and using me in my photography. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Deep Rooted Podcast and learning about your host. Make sure that you comment down below parts of your testimony or what has impacted you in this episode. In the next one, we're going to be talking about fear, how we overcome fear, and my personal battles with fear. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.